Council Archive Entry 8947. Recorded by Chronicler Zorath of the Quarren Confederation, 143rd Cycle of the 12th Galactic Council. This is the account of the Vorath Cull. Or rather, the Cull that was not. The Cull that broke the Vorath Imperium. The Cull that revealed humanity to the galaxy not as primitives to be purged, but as a power that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when hiding was no longer necessary. I was there. I saw it all. And I am still not certain I believe it. Let me begin at the beginning, so that future generations may understand not just what happened, but why. Context is everything when trying to understand a species as paradoxical as humanity. The Vorath Imperium had been members of the Galactic Council for over 40,000 standard cycles. They were among the founding species, one of the 7 original civilizations that had established the Council after the collapse of the ancient network. Their military was the largest in known space. Their technology was formidable, third only to the long-vanished ancients and the reclusive Mentari. Their culture was built on a single, unwavering principle: the strong have the right to cull the weak. For 40 millennia, the Council had tolerated this. Not because they agreed with it. Because they were afraid. The Vorath had never attacked another Council member directly, but they had culled 37 pre-spaceflight civilizations in that time, species they deemed too primitive or too dangerous to be allowed to develop independently. The Council would object weakly. The Vorath would ignore them. And the Council would do nothing, because doing something meant war with the Vorath, and no one wanted that war. The Vorath fleet was simply too large, too experienced, too implacable. Until humanity. I remember the exact moment the Vorath announced their intent to cull Sol Sector. It was Cycle 47 of the 143rd Council Session, Standard Galactic Time. The chamber was full, representatives from 847 species seated in the great amphitheater under the artificial sky of Council Central. The air was thick with anticipation. Rumors had been circulating for weeks that the Vorath had identified a new target. Vorath Supreme Commander Krael stood at the central podium, his massive frame casting a shadow over the delegates nearest him. He was typical of his species, 3 meters tall, thick gray hide that could withstand small arms fire, 4 powerful arms, and a face that had never learned to smile. The Vorath did not smile. They evaluated, they judged, and they destroyed. It was their purpose, their identity, their reason for existence. The human species has been under observation for 200 of their years, Krael said, his voice a low rumble that the translation systems converted to Standard Galactic. In that time, they have advanced from primitive atmospheric flight to interstellar colonization. They have expanded across 12 star systems. Their rate of technological growth exceeds the acceptable threshold by a factor of 7. He paused, letting the information sink in. By the terms of the Vorath Mandate, granted to this Council in the 12th cycle, we declare Sol Sector subject to culling. The human species represents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Their aggression, their adaptability, their relentless expansion all point to a species that cannot be allowed to reach full maturity. The chamber erupted. 50 species objected simultaneously. The Quarren delegation, which I led, was among the loudest. But the Vorath Mandate was ancient law, written into the Council Charter when the Vorath were the only species capable of enforcing galactic order. It gave them authority to cull any species they deemed a threat, with no oversight and no appeal. I rose to my feet and activated my speaking crystal. Supreme Commander, the humans have committed no act of aggression. They have not violated Council space. They have not attacked any member species. On what basis do you claim they are a threat? Krael turned his massive head toward me. His eyes, dark and pitiless, fixed on my position. Counselor Zorath, you are a scholar, not a warrior. You do not understand the nature of threats. The humans do not need to have attacked anyone to be dangerous. Their potential itself is the threat. Their rate of advancement suggests that within 50 of their years, they will surpass Vorath technology. Within 100, they will dominate the entire sector. The Vorath mandate exists to prevent such threats from ever reaching that point. And if this council refuses to authorize the cull, asked Representative Thrin of the Hive Collective, her many eyes glinting in the chamber light. Krael turned to face the Hive delegate. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through his features. The Vorath mandate does not require authorization, Representative. It requires notification. I have notified you of our intent. The debate is over. He stepped down from the podium. The session was over. The cull was coming, and there was nothing the council could do to stop it. What happened next defined the next phase of my existence. I tried everything to stop the cull through diplomatic channels. I filed emergency motions. I called for special sessions. I appealed to every species that had ever benefited from quarren mediation or trade. I spent 3 days in non-stop communication, reaching out to allies, neutral parties, even traditional enemies. Every single one of them said the same thing. They were sorry. They sympathized. They agreed that the Vorath were wrong. But they would not fight. No one would fight. The Vorath fleet was simply too powerful, too experienced, too dominant. Species that had chafed under Vorath domination for millennia still would not raise a hand against them. So I did the only thing left to me. I sent a private message to the human embassy. The humans maintained a small diplomatic presence on Council Central. Their embassy employed 12 staff members, led by a woman named Dr. Ilara Vance. They had been granted observer status 20 years earlier, shortly after their first faster-than-light mission reached Alpha Centauri. They were polite, curious, and utterly underestimated by everyone. The Vorath considered them amusing, a primitive species playing at interstellar civilization. The Council considered them promising but insignificant, a young species that might amount to something in a few thousand years if they survived that long. I had met Dr. Vance on several occasions at diplomatic functions. She was a former scientist who had transitioned to diplomacy when humanity established off-world colonies. She asked questions constantly, absorbed information like a quantum sponge, and never revealed what she was thinking. I liked her, which was unusual for me. I also suspected she knew far more than she let on about galactic politics, despite her species' relative newness to the stage. When I called her private channel, she answered immediately. Her face appeared on my display, calm and composed, as if she had been expecting my contact. "Counselor Zorath," she said. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this communication?" "Ambassador Vance, I have grave news. The Vorath Imperium has declared a cull on Sol Sector. A fleet of 800 warships is being assembled as we speak. They will arrive at your home system in 14 standard days. I am deeply sorry, but I have been unable to stop them through diplomatic means." Her expression did not change. If anything, she looked almost relieved. It was a reaction I could not process at the time. "I see," she said calmly. "Thank you for the warning, Counselor. We appreciate your friendship and your courage in contacting us. Ambassador, do you understand what I am telling you? The Vorath fleet has never failed to complete a cull. They have destroyed 37 civilizations. Their ships are armed with weapons that can crack planetary crusts. Your entire species will be exterminated within days of their arrival." She smiled. It was a small, knowing smile that I did not understand at the time but would come to recognize as the human expression for amused confidence. "Counselor, my species has survived on a Class 12 death world for approximately 300,000 years. We have survived ice ages that covered entire continents in kilometers of ice. We have survived asteroid impacts that created craters hundreds of kilometers wide. We have survived supervolcanoes that darkened the sky for decades. We have survived global pandemics that killed billions. We have survived nuclear weapons that we built ourselves and then decided never to use again." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine through the display. "The Vorath are not the first species to try to exterminate us. We have been trying to exterminate ourselves for most of our history, and we are still here. The Vorath will not succeed where we ourselves have failed. Please do not worry about us. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But I had seen the aftermath of Vorath culls. I had visited the memorial worlds, the graveyard planets where entire civilizations had been reduced to radioactive glass. I had spoken with the few survivors who had escaped, refugees who had watched their home worlds burn from a distance. I spent the next 14 days in a state of mounting dread. I attended emergency council sessions where representatives argued passionately about what to do, knowing in their hearts they would do nothing. I watched the Vorath fleet depart from their home system, a massive formation of warships that stretched for millions of kilometers, their FTL drives leaving trails of space that could be detected across half the galaxy. Every day, I checked on the human embassy. Every day, it remained open. Dr. Vance continued her daily routine. She attended council briefings. She filed diplomatic reports. She had tea with the Mentari delegation. She hosted a reception for new observer species. She did not evacuate a single staff member. She did not seem worried. This, I would later learn, was the first sign that everything we thought we knew about humanity was wrong. A species facing extinction does not behave the way the humans behaved. They did not panic. They did not beg. They did not flee. They simply continued their existence as if the Vorath fleet was an inconvenience rather than an apocalypse. I could not understand it. And my inability to understand should have been my first clue that I was dealing with something unprecedented. The Vorath fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system at exactly the time Krael had predicted. 800 warships in perfect formation. 14 support vessels carrying ground assault troops and occupation equipment. 3 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that had ended civilizations. It was the largest Cull fleet in Vorath history, a sign that the Vorath Council considered humanity a more significant threat than any species they had culled before. Krael transmitted the traditional Cull demand on all frequencies. His voice echoed across the Sol system, translated into human languages by the Vorath communication system. Attention, human species. This is Supreme Commander Krael of the Vorath Imperium. By the authority of the Vorath Mandate, granted by the Galactic Council in ancient times, your species has been deemed a threat to galactic stability. You are ordered to submit for culling. You have 1 standard hour to respond. Resistance is futile and will only increase your suffering. The human response came in 30 seconds. It did not come from a government building. It did not come from a military headquarters. It came from a ship that had been hiding in the shadow of Mercury, a vessel that no Vorath sensor had detected, that no council database had recorded, that no intelligence agency in the galaxy knew existed. The face that appeared on the view screen was human, male, advanced in age by their species standards. His face was lined. His hair was gray. His eyes held the calm of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, someone who had prepared for it down to the smallest detail. I am Admiral Alexander Thorne, Commander of the Sol Defense Force and the Sol Protectorate Fleet. On behalf of the 7 billion people of Earth and the 300 million colonists of the 12 systems of the Sol Protectorate, I reject your demand for culling. The human species does not recognize the authority of the Vorath Mandate, which was established without our consent and which violates every principle of justice and self-determination. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder. You are ordered to withdraw from Sol Protectorate space immediately. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your fleet. You have been warned. Krael laughed. It was broadcast on all channels, a sound like grinding stone, like tectonic plates colliding. It was the laugh of a predator that had just heard its prey threaten to fight back. Primitives, he said. You have no idea what you face. Your species has had faster-than-light travel for only 20 years. Your military consists of converted civilian ships armed with railguns and missiles. My flagship alone carries more firepower than your entire civilization has produced since you discovered fire. You will be reduced to dust, and your species will be remembered only as a warning to others who think they can defy the Vorath Imperium. Admiral Alexander Thorne did not argue. He did not threaten further. He simply said, "You have been warned, Supreme Commander. The consequences are yours to accept," and ended the transmission. The battle began 8 minutes later. The Vorath fleet advanced in their standard Cull formation. 200 destroyers formed the first wave, arranged in a wedge that had penetrated every defense ever raised against it. Behind them came 300 cruisers, their plasma cannons charging for the planetary bombardment that would follow. In the rear, the 3 dreadnoughts hung like dark moons, their spinal-mounted planet cracker weapons aimed at Earth. Their plan was simple and time-tested. The destroyers would clear orbital defenses. The cruisers would bombard population centers from orbit. The dreadnoughts would crack the planetary crust if any resistance remained. Once the surface was neutralized, ground forces would descend to purge survivors from bunkers and shelters. They had used this exact formation 37 times before. It had never failed. It failed spectacularly this time. The first wave of Vorath destroyers crossed the orbit of Mars, approximately 200 million kilometers from Earth. At that moment, the sole defense grid activated. I was watching from Council Central on a real-time tactical display that the human embassy had surprisingly provided. The display showed a three-dimensional map of the Sol system with icons representing every ship, station, and defensive platform. When the defense grid activated, I saw it as a shimmering network of blue light that surrounded Earth like a protective web. The Vorath destroyers entered the grid, and they ceased to exist. Not exploded. Not disabled. Not damaged. Ceased to exist at the molecular level. One moment they were there, 200 warships crewed by 40,000 Vorath warriors, moving in perfect formation. The next moment, they were expanding spheres of subatomic particles, glittering clouds that caught the sunlight and scattered it like diamonds. The tactical display showed the energy signature of the weapons that had destroyed them. It matched nothing in our databases. The technology was completely unknown to the Council and to the Vorath. It operated on principles that our science had not even theorized, manipulating quantum states to break molecular bonds with surgical precision across distances of millions of kilometers. Krael's reaction was broadcast throughout the Council network. He went from arrogant confidence to barely controlled rage in the space of a single heartbeat. What was that? He roared at his tactical officers. Analyze that energy signature. Identify their weapons. How are primitives doing this? His officers scrambled to comply, but their sensors were useless. The defense grid had left no trace of its operating principles. It was as if the universe had simply decided that 200 Vorath ships should no longer exist, and they had obliged. The second wave of the Vorath fleet advanced, this time with shields at maximum output and point defense systems running at full capacity. 300 cruisers moved forward, their commanders surely hoping that the first wave had triggered a one-shot defense system, a weapon that could not be reused or recharged. They were wrong. The defense grid activated again, and 300 more ships were reduced to particles. The process took approximately 90 seconds. In that time and a half, the Vorath Imperium lost more warships than it had lost in the previous 10,000 years combined. Krael screamed orders at his remaining commanders. The dreadnoughts opened fire with their planet cracker cannons, hoping to overwhelm the defense grid with sheer power. Massive beams of condensed energy lanced toward Earth, each one capable of cracking a continental plate. The defense grid intercepted them. The beams hit the shimmering web and simply stopped. They did not penetrate. They did not deflect. They dissipated, their energy absorbed and dispersed across the grid's network. The planet cracker cannons, the most powerful weapons in the Vorath arsenal, could not even scratch the human defensive system. On the tactical display, I watched as the energy readings from the defense grid spiked and then normalized. The humans had absorbed the most powerful attack in known space and had done so without visible effort. Krael ordered a retreat. The remaining 300 ships pulled back beyond the orbit of Mars, regrouping in the asteroid belt and trying to understand what they had just encountered. For the first time in 40,000 years, a Vorath fleet was in retreat. On the tactical display, I saw the defense grid power down. The shimmering web of blue light faded. The energy signature vanished. And then I saw something that made my species equivalent of blood run cold. 200 human warships emerged from hidden positions across the Sol system. They had been concealed on the far side of Luna, buried beneath the surface of Ceres, hidden in the rings of Saturn, parked in the shadow of gas giants, drifting in the Oort cloud among the comets. Locations where no reconnaissance had ever thought to look, because why would a primitive species have warships to hide? The ships were sleek and dark and utterly silent. They moved with a coordination that suggested a single consciousness was controlling them all, though I would later learn that they used a distributed AI network that allowed instantaneous communication and coordination across vast distances. I checked the ship classifications on my display. The humans had labeled them as Resolute-class battlecruisers. Each one was approximately the same size as a Vorath cruiser, but the energy readings coming from their power plants were off the scale. Their reactors were generating more than 10 times the energy output of anything I had ever measured on a vessel of that size. On Earth, in the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Alexander Thorne watched the tactical display with an expression that betrayed nothing. Around him, 300 officers worked in coordinated silence, their stations feeding data from across the system into a unified command network. His daughter, Captain Sarah Thorne, commanded the newly formed Third Fleet from the bridge of the HFY Resolute. She had been stationed beyond Mars when the Vorath arrived, and her voice came through his personal communications link with an edge of controlled tension. "Admiral, Third Fleet is in position. All ships report combat ready. Awaiting your order." Alexander Thorne allowed himself a brief moment of paternal pride. Sarah had been 6 years old when he had first taken her to see the secret shipyards being constructed in the asteroid belt. She had grown up with the knowledge that humanity was preparing for something, that the bright and peaceful future they were building was shadowed by the possibility of extinction. He had not wanted that burden for his daughter. But humanity's survival depended on every generation carrying it forward. "Hold position, Commander. Let the defense grid do its work first. We do not show our full hand until we must." "Aye, Admiral." Alexander Thorne had been preparing for this moment for 37 years. He had been a young lieutenant when the Prometheus Initiative was formed, a secret global project born from a single chilling realization: humanity was not alone in the universe, and the beings who shared the galaxy might not be friendly. For 3 decades, the greatest minds of humanity had worked in secret to develop technologies that would give their species a chance at survival. They had built hidden shipyards in the outer system, constructed a defense grid around Earth using principles that defied conventional physics, and developed weapons that turned the Vorath's own technological assumptions against them. Every breakthrough came from human ingenuity, from solving problems that no other species had faced because no other species had evolved on a world as demanding as Earth. The first Prometheus Initiative director, Dr. Helena Thorne, Alexander Thorne's own mother, had been the one to establish the core doctrine that guided everything that followed. She had written in her final report, just before her death at the age of 94, "We must prepare as if the worst will happen. We must hope that our preparations are never needed. But if they are needed, we must be ready to win decisively, because a drawn-out war is a war we cannot afford to fight." Her son had carried that doctrine forward for 3 decades. And now, watching the Vorath fleet advance into the kill zone, he knew that her vision had been correct. The defense grid activated, and the first wave of Vorath destroyers vanished from existence. "Targets eliminated," a tactical officer reported. 200 confirmed kills. Grid integrity at 98%. "Begin cycling secondary capacitors," Alexander Thorne ordered. "The second wave will be larger." He opened a channel to Krael. His face was calm, his voice measured. "Supreme Commander, you have lost 500 ships. Your planet cracker cannons cannot penetrate our defensive grid. Your remaining forces are outnumbered and outgunned by our fleet. You have 2 choices. Withdraw from Sol space and never return, or stay and be destroyed. I recommend the first option. Krael's response was predictable to anyone who understood Vorath psychology. Pride was the defining characteristic of his species. They had never retreated from a battle. They had never surrendered. They had never admitted defeat. The concept was not in their cultural vocabulary. I will not retreat from primitives, Krael snarled. My warriors will destroy your ships in direct combat. Your technology may be advanced, but you do not have the experience, the training, the warrior spirit that has made the Vorath Imperium dominant for 40,000 years. We will tear your fleet apart. Alexander Thorne sighed. It was a very human sound, one that conveyed disappointment rather than fear. Supreme Commander, you have made a grave error. You have confused our restraint with weakness. We did not destroy your entire fleet because we hoped you would make the right choice. You have chosen otherwise. So be it. He turned to someone off-screen. Commander Thorne, you have the bridge. End this. A new face appeared on the tactical channel, younger, sharper, with the same eyes as Admiral Alexander Thorne. Admiral. All ships, execute attack pattern Omega. We end this now. Captain Sarah Thorne felt the vibration of the Resolute's main reactor through the deck plates as the ship surged forward. The bridge crew around her moved with practiced efficiency, their faces illuminated by tactical displays that showed the Vorath fleet in real time. All ships, this is Fleet Commander Thorne. Execute attack pattern Omega. Target the dreadnoughts first. Take away their command structure and the rest will collapse. The human fleet moved as one. The Resolute-class battlecruisers had been designed for exactly this kind of engagement. Their quantum resonance drives allowed acceleration profiles that would have turned any biological crew into paste, but the humans had solved this problem through a combination of inertial dampeners and direct neural integration that allowed the ship's AI to execute maneuvers faster than any organic being could react. Sarah Thorne had been flying spacecraft since she was 16 years old. She had logged more than 50,000 hours in simulated combat against every conceivable opponent. She had trained for this battle her entire adult life. None of that training had fully prepared her for the reality of combat. The first Vorath cruiser she engaged fired over 100 plasma bolts in the space of 10 seconds. The Resolute's predictive defense system tracked every single one, plotting their trajectories and computing the optimal evasion path in milliseconds. The ship twisted through the barrage like a dancer avoiding raindrops, and not a single bolt touched its hull. Return fire, Thorne ordered. Forward cannons, target their reactor core. The Resolute's main cannon fired a concentrated beam of quantum-disrupted energy. It struck the Vorath cruiser at a point where its shields were weakest, penetrated the armor, and detonated the reactor. The cruiser became an expanding ball of plasma. One confirmed kill, her tactical officer reported. Confirmed, Thorne acknowledged. Target the next. We have 46 minutes to end this. Across the battle space, the same scene was playing out with variations. Human ships engaged Vorath vessels with a combination of technology and tactics that the Vorath had never encountered. The humans did not fight the way the Vorath expected. They did not form lines of battle. They did not exchange volleys at range. They moved constantly, striking from unexpected angles, using the geometry of the system itself as a weapon. A Vorath destroyer attempted to use the gravity well of Jupiter to execute a slingshot maneuver and gain an advantageous position. The human commander responsible for that sector had anticipated exactly this move. 3 human cruisers were already waiting on the other side of the gravity well, and when the Vorath destroyer emerged from its maneuver, it flew directly into their overlapping fields of fire. The Vorath dreadnought Vengeance of Krael attempted to ram a human cruiser. The human ship's commander, seeing the massive vessel bearing down on her, made a split-second decision. She fired her main cannon directly into the dreadnought's forward hull, aiming not for the bridge or the reactor, but for a specific structural weak point that human intelligence had identified years ago from observation of Vorath ship designs. The beam struck exactly where she had aimed. The Dreadnought's forward armor fractured. The internal bulkheads collapsed. The chain reaction reached the main reactor in less than a second. When the vengeance of Krael exploded, it took 3 nearby Vorath cruisers with it. Sarah Thorne witnessed the explosion from her bridge and allowed herself a brief nod of satisfaction. Good shooting, Captain Becky. Mark that dreadnought as confirmed kill. Acknowledged, Commander. Moving to next target. The battle continued for another 30 minutes. Human ships were hit. Human shields were stressed to their limits. Human crews experienced the terror of combat, the adrenaline, the fear, the moments of uncertainty. But not a single human ship was destroyed. Not one. When the last Vorath warship was disabled and the surviving crew were being retrieved by rescue shuttles, Sarah Thorne sat back in her command chair and allowed herself to process what had just happened. They had won. They had won decisively, completely, overwhelmingly. And she had lost none of her people. She opened a channel to her father. Admiral, the system is secure. All hostiles neutralized. Casualties, 0. There was a long pause before Alexander Thorne responded. When he did, his voice was thick with emotion that he rarely showed. Well done, Commander. Well done, all of you. Your mother would have been proud. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. Thank you, Admiral. The fleet stands ready for any further orders. Stand down, Commander. The Vorath have learned their lesson. At least for today. I watched the entire engagement on the tactical display from Council Central, and I could not believe what I was seeing. The human ships moved like nothing I had ever observed. They accelerated at rates that should have liquefied their crews. They changed direction instantaneously without any deceleration. They fired weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics as we understood them. One engagement stood out above all others. A Vorath dreadnought, the vengeance of Krael, the largest ship in the Vorath fleet, attempted to ram a human cruiser. It was a desperate tactic, but one that had historically worked against technologically inferior opponents. The dreadnought accelerated to maximum speed and drove directly at the human ship. The human ship did not evade. It did not attempt to run. Instead, it fired a single shot from its main cannon. The beam, narrow and intense, struck the dreadnought at a point on its forward hull. The beam penetrated the armor, the inner hull, the reactor shielding, and the reactor itself in a fraction of a second. The vengeance of Krael exploded in a fireball that lit up the entire system. One shot. One ship. One kill. The surviving Vorath ships attempted to flee, but the human fleet had already surrounded them. Human ships appeared from every direction, their weapons firing with precision that seemed almost surgical. Vorath shields collapsed. Vorath armor shattered. Vorath crews died by the thousands. At the end of those 47 minutes, Supreme Commander Krael sat alone in the wreckage of his command center, surrounded by the bodies of his senior officers, and received a final transmission from Admiral Alexander Thorne. Supreme Commander, your fleet is destroyed. Your ship is disabled. You are alive because I chose to let you live. You will return to your home world and you will deliver a message to the Vorath Council. The Sol Protectorate does not seek war with the Vorath Imperium. We have no desire to conquer your territory or destroy your civilization. But if the Vorath Imperium attacks us again, we will not stop at your fleet. We will go to your home world, and we will demonstrate exactly what a Class 12 death world produces when it is threatened. Krael did not respond. He could not. His worldview, his identity, everything he believed about the universe had been shattered in less than an hour. The Vorath Imperium, the dominant military power in the galaxy for 40,000 years, had been completely and decisively defeated by a species that they had considered too primitive to warrant serious attention. A human rescue ship arrived to retrieve Krael and his surviving crew. They were treated with professional courtesy, given medical attention, and transferred to a Vorath recovery vessel that had been permitted to enter the system under a flag of truce. The Vorath fleet that had arrived with 800 warships departed with one crippled command ship. The council chamber was silent when the tactical display went dark. No one spoke. No one moved. The representatives of 847 species sat in stunned disbelief, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Speaker Mentar, his energy form flickering with what I recognized as emotional disturbance, was the first to find his voice. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we have fundamentally misunderstood the human species. I believe we have made an error of historic proportions. And I believe we need to reconsider every assumption we have made about the nature of power in this galaxy." The next 72 hours were the most chaotic in Council history. Emergency sessions ran continuously without breaks. Intelligence agencies across the galaxy scrambled desperately to find any information about human technology that they had overlooked. The Vorath delegation withdrew from the Council entirely, claiming that the humans must have violated galactic law by developing weapons beyond their permitted technological level. But there was no such law. The Council had rules about sharing technology with pre-spaceflight civilizations. It had rules about weapons of mass destruction. It had guidelines about acceptable military development. But it had no laws prohibiting a species from secretly developing advanced technology for self-defense. The humans had not broken any laws. They had simply hidden their capabilities, and they had done it so effectively that no one in the galaxy, not even the supposedly all-seeing Vorath intelligence network, had suspected a thing. I requested a private meeting with Dr. Vance. She agreed without hesitation. Her office on Council Central was small and sparsely decorated by galactic standards. A few human artifacts. A plant that I later learned was called a peace lily. A picture of a blue and green planet that I assumed was Earth. She offered me a beverage called tea, which I politely declined, and then she sat across from me with that same calm, knowing expression. "You wanted to see me, Counselor?" she asked. "I want to understand," I said. "How did you hide this from everyone? The Vorath have been observing your species for 200 years. The Council has maintained surveillance on your system. How did you keep a fleet of 200 warships and a planetary defense grid a secret?" Dr. Vance sipped her tea thoughtfully before answering. "Counselor, do you know what the most significant technological achievement of Earth's 21st century was? Your faster-than-light drive, I assume." "No. That came much later. The most significant technological achievement of the 21st century was a device called the smartphone." I waited for an explanation that did not immediately come. "A smartphone," she continued, "is a handheld communication device that contains more computing power than all the computers that existed on Earth combined when I was born in the late 20th century. Every human on Earth carries one. They use them to communicate, to navigate, to access information, to run artificial intelligence algorithms, to coordinate activities across the entire planet. The Vorath observed these devices for decades and dismissed them as primitive communication tools." She set down her cup. They did not understand what they were seeing because they were looking for technology that looked like their own technology. They expected large reactors, massive weapons, obvious military installations. They did not recognize that the foundation of our military superiority was distributed across billions of network devices that they had already dismissed as irrelevant to military capability. She leaned forward. "We did not hide our technology, Counselor. We showed it to everyone. We broadcast our scientific discoveries on public networks. We published our research in open journals. We demonstrated our capabilities at international exhibitions. We just made sure that no one understood what they were looking at, because they were evaluating our technology through the lens of their own assumptions." I sat back, my mind reeling. The implications were staggering. If the humans had hidden a fleet and a planetary defense grid using technology that the Vorath had already observed and dismissed, what else were they hiding? As if reading my thoughts, Dr. Vance added, "And yes, before you ask, the fleet you saw is not our full military capability. The Sol Defense Force represents approximately 60% of our space-based military assets. There are systems and capabilities that remain undeclared, even now, because we believe in maintaining a strategic reserve for contingencies we cannot currently anticipate. How much more do you have? I asked directly. She smiled that small, knowing smile that I was beginning to recognize as her diplomatic expression. Counselor, with respect, I have been a diplomat for too long to answer that question honestly. But let me offer you a perspective that might help you understand us better. The Vorath evaluated our military capability based on what they observed, not on what we could produce. They assumed that because our visible technology appeared primitive, our hidden technology must also be primitive. They assumed that because we had not revealed our advanced capabilities, we did not possess them. She picked up her tea again. Humans have a saying, Counselor. It is not the wolf that howls the loudest that is the most dangerous. It is the wolf that watches and waits and chooses its moment to strike. We have been watching and waiting for a very long time. I left that meeting with more questions than answers. I also left with a profound sense of unease that I could not shake. The humans had defeated the most powerful fleet in known space. They had revealed technology that surpassed anything in the Council's possession. And they had done it all while maintaining the appearance of being a harmless, primitive, slightly amusing species. What kind of species could deceive the entire galaxy for 200 years? The answer, I would learn through months of study and observation, was a species that had evolved on a world where deception was not just an advantage but a survival necessity. A species that had spent its entire evolutionary history hiding its true capabilities from predators. A species that had learned, through hundreds of thousands of years of brutal natural selection, that the most effective defense was to appear weaker than you actually were. On Earth, the deadliest predators were not the largest or the strongest. They were the ones that concealed themselves, that stalked their prey, that attacked from ambush. Humans had inherited that evolutionary legacy. They had turned it into a military doctrine. The Vorath Cull had failed. That was obvious to everyone. But the consequences of that failure were only beginning to unfold, and they would reshape the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. The first major consequence came within days of the battle. As news spread across the galactic communication network, species that had been quietly suffering under Vorath domination for millennia began to reach out to the human embassy. They sent messages of congratulations. They offered expressions of support. They asked for military assistance, for protection, for alliances. The human response surprised everyone. They did not demand tribute. They did not claim territory. They did not assert dominance. Instead, they offered to negotiate with every species that approached them. They proposed mutual defense treaties, not as a conquering power but as an equal partner. They established a network of alliances that grew faster than any diplomatic initiative in Council history. Within 3 months of the battle, the humans had formal defense agreements with 47 species. Within 6 months, that number had grown to over 200. The Sol Protectorate, once a minor observer on the galactic stage, had become the center of a new coalition that rivaled the Vorath Imperium in political influence if not yet in military size. The Vorath watched this with growing alarm. Their military was still the largest in the galaxy. Their territory still spanned thousands of light years. Their industrial capacity was still immense. But their reputation had been shattered. The mystique of Vorath invincibility, carefully cultivated over 40,000 years, had been destroyed in 47 minutes of combat. Species that had paid tribute to the Vorath for millennia began to withhold their payments. Allies that had stood with the Vorath through countless conflicts began to reconsider their loyalties. The cracks in the Imperium spread like fractures in ice under pressure. The Vorath Council, in a desperate attempt to restore their position, demanded that the Galactic Council intervene. They accused the humans of developing weapons that violated the ancient accords, the foundational treaties that had established galactic civilization. They demanded that the humans be disarmed immediately and placed under permanent council supervision. Speaker Mentar convened a special session to consider the Vorath complaint. I attended as the Quarren representative, and I watched as the Vorath presented their case. Supreme Commander Krael, still physically and psychologically recovering from his defeat, spoke with barely controlled rage. The humans have violated the fundamental principles of galactic order, he declared, his voice shaking with emotion that his species usually concealed. They have developed weapons that exceed the technological boundaries established by the ancient accords. They have concealed their military capabilities from this council in a deliberate act of deception. They represent an existential threat to every species in this chamber. He turned to face the human delegation, led by Dr. Vance. They must be disarmed. Their technology must be confiscated and studied by neutral observers. Their species must be placed under permanent council supervision until we can determine the full extent of their capabilities. The chamber was quiet. I could sense the fear in the room. Many representatives were genuinely frightened of humanity now, frightened of what they had seen, frightened of what they did not know. Dr. Vance rose to respond. She walked to the central podium with the calm confidence of someone who had already won the argument before it began. Supreme Commander, I have a question. When your fleet arrived at the Sol system, how many warships did you command? Krael hesitated, clearly not wanting to answer. 800. And how many of those 800 ships survived the engagement? The silence stretched. None, he finally admitted. My flagship was permitted to retreat. All other vessels were destroyed. That is correct. In 47 minutes, the Sol Defense Force destroyed an invasion fleet of 800 Vorath warships without losing a single vessel. Now you come before this council and demand that we be punished for being too effective at defending ourselves. She turned to address the full chamber. We did not start this conflict. We did not seek this war. We did not violate any law, any treaty, any agreement that this council has ever established. We simply defended ourselves against an unprovoked genocidal attack by a species that has exterminated 37 civilizations over 40,000 years, with the tacit approval of this council. Her voice hardened. And now the aggressor wants this assembled body to punish the victim for being too strong. They want you to disarm us because we refuse to let them exterminate us. They want you to hand over our technology, our secrets, our defensive capabilities to the very species that tried to wipe us from existence. She shook her head slowly. The Vorath Mandate is the root of this problem. It has allowed one species to act as judge, jury, and executioner for 40,000 years. It has sanctioned genocide on a galactic scale. It has created a culture of fear that has paralyzed this council and prevented it from fulfilling its true purpose as a force for cooperation and peace. She looked directly at Speaker Mentar. I propose that the Vorath Mandate be revoked. I propose that the practice of culling be declared a crime against galactic civilization, punishable by the full military and economic weight of this council. And I propose that the human species be granted full membership in this council, with all the rights and responsibilities that status entails. The chamber erupted. Half the representatives rose to their feet in support. The other half shouted objections. The Vorath delegation walked out in protest, their chairs spinning as they departed. For a long, dangerous moment, it seemed like the council might physically fracture. Speaker Mentar called for order repeatedly. It took 7 full minutes for the chamber to quiet enough for him to speak. This is an extraordinary proposal, he said, his energy form pulsing with what I interpreted as deep concern. The Vorath Mandate has been part of our founding charter since the establishment of this council. It cannot be revoked without a unanimous vote of all member species. Then amend the charter, Dr. Vance said simply. The galaxy has changed, Speaker. The council must change with it, or it will become irrelevant. The Vorath have demonstrated that they cannot be trusted with the power we have given them. The humans have demonstrated that power can be used responsibly. The choice before us is whether we will evolve or stagnate. The debate continued for 17 standard days. Alliances shifted and fractured and reformed. Threats were made privately and publicly. Deals were struck in shadowy corridors. And in the end, the Vorath Mandate was not revoked. It could not be, not under the existing charter, not without a unanimous vote that could never be achieved. But the Council did pass 3 significant resolutions. The first condemned the Vorath Cull of Sol sector as unjustified and disproportionate. The second granted humanity full membership in the Council by an overwhelming majority. The third established a special committee to review the Vorath mandate for possible amendment, with a mandate to report back within 5 cycles. It was not everything Dr. Vance had asked for. But it was a start. More importantly, it was a signal. The galaxy was changing, and the old order was crumbling. In the months that followed, the transformation accelerated in ways that no one had anticipated. Humanity joined the Council and immediately began advocating for reforms that had been considered impossible for centuries. They pushed for stronger protections for pre-spaceflight civilizations. They pushed for limits on military expansion and weapons development. They pushed for transparency in Council operations and decision-making. They were not always successful. They faced opposition from conservative factions, from species that benefited from the old order, from those who feared change. But they were always persistent, always reasonable, always willing to compromise when necessary and hold firm when principles were at stake. The Vorath Imperium, meanwhile, began to fracture internally. The loss at Sol had damaged their prestige beyond repair, and the subsequent political defeats had eroded their influence. Internal factions emerged. Some called for reconciliation with humanity and acceptance of the new order. Others demanded a second, larger attack, a war of vengeance that would restore Vorath honor. The reconciliation faction was led by a younger Vorath commander named Krael who had served under Krael at Sol and had been profoundly affected by the experience. I interviewed him for my archives, and his words stayed with me. "Counselor Zorath," he said, his voice carrying a weariness that was unusual for his species, "I watched 800 of our finest warships destroyed by a species we had dismissed as irrelevant. I watched our most powerful weapons absorbed by a defense system we did not understand. I watched our warriors die by the thousands while the humans lost not a single ship." He paused, his 4 arms folded in a gesture of contemplation. "I have spent my entire existence believing that the Vorath were the pinnacle of military evolution, that our strength was absolute, that our dominance was inevitable. I was wrong. The humans have achieved something that we have not. They have built a military capability that surpasses ours while maintaining peace with their neighbors. They have developed weapons of incredible power and then chosen not to use them for conquest." He looked at me directly. "That is true strength, Counselor. Not the ability to destroy, but the ability to choose not to. I do not know if my species is capable of learning that lesson. But I know that we must try, or we will become irrelevant." Commander Krael's faction did not win. Not immediately. The war faction controlled the Vorath Council, and they began quietly rebuilding their fleet and planning for a second assault. But the fact that a reconciliation faction existed at all was unprecedented in Vorath history. 40,000 years of unquestioned dominance had been shattered, and the pieces could not be put back together the same way. Admiral Alexander Thorne, now the human military representative to the Council, made a statement during this period that I will never forget. "The Vorath can attack us again if they choose," he said during a Council security briefing. "We will be ready for them. We will always be ready. But I hope they do not attack, because if they do, we will not simply defend ourselves this time. We will go to their home world, and we will end the threat permanently. And I do not think anyone in this galaxy truly wants to see what humanity is capable of when we are not holding back." It was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had already considered every possible outcome and prepared for all of them. And coming from a species that had just demonstrated the ability to destroy a Vorath fleet without losing a single ship, it carried weight that no amount of diplomatic maneuvering could match. The Prometheus Initiative, I would later learn from declassified human records, had been the most ambitious secret project in human history. It began in 2087, when a joint international task force was formed after humanity's deep space observatories detected unmistakable signs of advanced technology in nearby star systems. The discovery that humanity was not alone, that other civilizations existed out there, some of which might not be friendly, galvanized the entire planet into unified action. For 30 years, the best human scientists worked in absolute secrecy, pushing the boundaries of known physics. They developed new theories that built on the work of Einstein, Bohr, and the quantum pioneers. They learned to harness quantum resonance for propulsion, to manipulate gravitational fields for defense, to store and release energy in ways that mainstream science had dismissed as impossible. They built prototype after prototype in secret facilities hidden beneath oceans, inside mountains, on the far side of the moon. They made mistakes. They had accidents. People died. But they persisted. By 2117, they had constructed the first functional quantum resonance drive, a propulsion system that could accelerate a ship to relativistic speeds without the crushing g-forces that would kill any biological crew. By 2127, they had developed the first defensive grid emitters. By 2147, the first Resolute-class battlecruiser was under construction in the Ceres shipyard. And throughout it all, they kept the secret. They maintained the fiction that humanity was still decades away from meaningful space travel. They pretended that their ships were slow and vulnerable and primitive. They let the galaxy underestimate them, because being underestimated was the most powerful weapon they possessed. When Admiral Alexander Thorne took command of the Sol Defense Force in 2163, he inherited a fleet that had never been tested in combat, weapons that had never been fired in anger, and a doctrine that assumed humanity would eventually be discovered and attacked. His mother, Dr. Helena Thorne, had died 10 years earlier, but her vision guided everything he did. Prepare for the worst, she had told him on her deathbed. Hope for the best. And never let them see what you are capable of until you have no choice. He had followed that advice for 20 years. And when the Vorath finally came, he was ready. I met with Admiral Alexander Thorne privately a few weeks after his statement to the Council. I wanted to understand the human mindset, the thing that made them different from every other species I had encountered in my 3,000 cycles of service. We sat in his office on the human military station orbiting Luna. The window showed Earth, blue and white and impossibly beautiful against the blackness of space. I had seen many worlds in my long existence, but none of them affected me the way Earth did. Perhaps it was because I now knew what lurked beneath that peaceful surface. Counselor Zorath, he said, you want to know why we hid our technology. You want to know why we waited 200 years to reveal our true capabilities. The answer is both simple and complex. The simple answer is that we were afraid. Afraid? I repeated. You just defeated the most powerful military in known galactic history. Yes, he agreed. But we did not know that we could. When the Prometheus Initiative began its work, when we started developing our own advanced technology and building our secret fleet in hidden shipyards across the outer system, we had no idea if our efforts would be sufficient. We knew the Vorath existed. We knew they had culled other species without mercy. We knew that if they ever turned their attention to us, we would need every advantage we could create. He looked at Earth through the window. Humanity has always been afraid, Counselor. It is the engine that drives us. Fear of extinction. Fear of failure. Fear of being conquered by forces beyond our control. We have turned that fear into a weapon, into a motivation, into a drive to prepare for every possible threat. And now? I asked. Are you still afraid? He was silent for a long moment. Yes. But now our fear has a different quality. Before the battle, we were afraid of the unknown. We did not know if our technology would work, if our strategies would succeed, if our preparations would be sufficient. Now we know. And that knowledge is almost more frightening than the uncertainty was. Why? He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen in any being before. It was not confidence. It was not arrogance. It was not pride. It was a deep, abiding certainty that was somehow more unsettling than any of those things. Counselor, we have been preparing for an enemy like the Vorath for 200 years. We have built weapons that we have never tested in combat. We have developed strategies that we have never had occasion to employ. We have created capabilities that even our own people do not fully understand. The battle you witnessed was not our full strength. It was not even close to our full strength. I felt a chill run through my entire body. What is your full strength? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I genuinely hope you never have to find out. And I hope the Vorath are wise enough not to force us to demonstrate it. That was the moment I understood something fundamental about humanity that I had been missing. They were not just technologically advanced. They were strategically patient in a way that no other species in the galaxy could match. They had spent 2 centuries preparing for a war they hoped would never come, building capabilities they hoped they would never need to use. And when the war did come, they had won so decisively that they had changed the balance of power in the galaxy overnight. What kind of species prepares for 2 centuries for a war that lasts less than an hour? What kind of species builds weapons they never intend to use, develops strategies they never plan to execute, creates capabilities they hope to keep hidden forever? The answer, I realized, was a species that had learned from its own bloody history. A species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times before achieving global unity. A species that understood, better than any other, that the best victory is the one that never has to be fought. That was 18 months ago. Since then, humanity has become one of the most influential species in the Galactic Council. They have brokered peace between warring factions that had been in conflict for centuries. They have provided disaster relief to species they had never met, sending ships and supplies across thousands of light years to help strangers in distress. They have shared technology freely, not their advanced military technology, but medical and agricultural advances that have improved the quality of life for billions across the galaxy. And they have waited. They have watched. They have prepared. I asked Dr. Vance, before she retired as ambassador and returned to Earth, why humanity had chosen to help so many species rather than exploiting their newly revealed power for conquest. Her answer has stayed with me ever since. Counselor, on Earth, we have a concept called the common good. It is the idea that we are all in this together, that the success of one is the success of all, that helping others is not a sacrifice but an investment in a better future. We learned this concept the hard way, through centuries of war and conflict and suffering that nearly destroyed us multiple times. We learned that cooperation is stronger than competition in the long run. We learned that helping others is not a weakness but a form of enlightened self-interest. She paused, considering her next words carefully. The Vorath believe that strength is the ability to destroy. We believe that strength is the ability to protect. Our technology, our military, our capabilities are not tools of conquest. They are tools of defense, built by a species that has spent its entire existence fighting for survival against impossible odds. We built them not so we could dominate the galaxy, but so that no one could dominate us. And now that you have the power to dominate? I asked. Her smile was warm but carried an edge of steel. Then we have the responsibility not to use it. At least, not for conquest. But make no mistake, Counselor. If the Vorath attack again, or if any species threatens humanity or our allies, we will respond with overwhelming force. We have learned from our own history that the only way to prevent bullies from bullying is to make the cost of bullying too high to pay. I am an old being. I have served on the Galactic Council for over 3,000 cycles. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed wars that consumed entire sectors and left behind nothing but radioactive debris. I have observed the birth and death of more species than I can count. But I have never observed a species quite like humanity. They are fundamentally paradoxical. They are capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary kindness, often at the same time, without seeing any contradiction. They can destroy a fleet and save a civilization in the same week, and they will tell you that both actions came from the same motivation, the desire to protect what they value. They are driven by fear and hope in equal measure, and they have turned both into engines of progress that have propelled them from a Class 12 death world to a galactic power in a mere 200 years of interstellar existence. The Vorath Cull failed. But more than that, it revealed something that the galaxy had not understood about itself. The old order, the order of fear and domination and culling, was no longer sustainable. Humanity had not just defended itself. It had demonstrated that a different way was possible. It had shown that strength did not have to mean oppression, that power could be used for protection rather than destruction, that the most formidable weapon in the universe was not a planet cracker cannon or a quantum disruptor, but the will to build a better future and the patience to wait for the right moment to act. The Vorath Imperium still exists. They still command the largest conventional fleet in the galaxy in terms of sheer numbers. They still talk about restoring their honor and their position in the galactic order. But they have not attacked again, and I do not believe they will. The lesson of Soul was clear: humanity is not a species to be culled. They are a species to be respected, to be partnered with, to be learned from. On the Vorath home world of Krael Prime, the political situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Council of Elders, the ruling body of the Vorath Imperium, had convened an emergency session immediately after Krael's defeated fleet limped home. The chamber, carved from the living rock of a mountain that had stood for 1 billion years, was filled with the most powerful beings in Vorath society. And they were terrified. "We have lost 800 warships," Elder Vornak thundered, his 4 arms gesturing wildly. 800. The humans destroyed our fleet in less than a standard hour. They did not lose a single vessel. How is this possible? Supreme Commander Krael stood before the council, his body bearing no physical wounds but his spirit clearly shattered. The humans possess technology that we do not understand. Their weapons operate on principles that our scientists cannot explain. Their ships move in ways that violate our understanding of physics. This is your excuse. Elder Morath sneered. You failed because the enemy was too advanced. You commanded the largest Cull fleet in our history and you returned with nothing but excuses? I returned with the truth, Krael said quietly. And the truth is that we cannot defeat the humans. Not now. Perhaps not ever. The chamber erupted into chaos. Elders shouted over each other. Factions that had been simmering beneath the surface for centuries suddenly emerged into open conflict. The war faction demanded an immediate second assault, larger and more devastating than the first. The traditionalist faction called for caution, for study, for understanding the enemy before engaging again. And the newly formed reconciliation faction, led by Commander Krael, proposed something that had never been suggested in Vorath history: negotiation. Negotiation? Elder Vornak spat. We are Vorath. We do not negotiate with prey. We cull them. That is our purpose. That is our identity. Krael stepped forward, his posture respectful but his voice firm. With respect, Elder, if we try to cull the humans again, they have promised to bring the war to our home world. And after witnessing their capabilities firsthand, I believe they are capable of making good on that promise. We must consider the possibility that our traditional approach is no longer viable. The debate raged for days. In the end, no decision was reached. The Vorath Council, paralyzed by fear and pride in equal measure, could not agree on a course of action. They did not authorize a second attack. They did not authorize negotiations. They did nothing, hoping that the problem would somehow resolve itself. It did not. The problem of humanity continued to grow. Across the galaxy, the news of the Vorath defeat spread like fire through dry grass. Species that had lived in fear of the Vorath for millennia began to stir. Diplomatic missions that had been frozen for centuries suddenly resumed. Alliances that had seemed impossible were proposed and discussed. The first delegation to arrive at the human embassy after the battle came from the Hive Collective, a species that had been resisting Vorath expansion for over 3,000 years. Their representative, a being who communicated through a chorus of synchronized voices, made an offer that surprised even the humans. We have observed your battle, the Hive representative said. We have analyzed your tactics and technology. We believe that you represent a new paradigm in galactic civilization. We wish to establish formal diplomatic relations and explore the possibility of a mutual defense agreement. Dr. Vance, who received the delegation personally, responded with characteristic caution. We are honored by your interest. But we must be clear, humanity does not seek to replace one dominant power with another. We seek a galaxy where no species dominates another. The Hive representative's many eyes blinked in sequence. That is precisely why we approached you. A species that possesses your power and chooses not to use it for conquest is a species we can trust. Within weeks, similar delegations arrived from a dozen other species. The pattern was always the same. They had been living under the shadow of Vorath dominance. They saw in humanity a potential protector, or at least a counterweight to Vorath power. They wanted to be part of whatever new order was emerging. The humans accepted every delegation, negotiated with every species, and signed mutual defense treaties with those who were willing to commit to peace. They did not demand tribute or territory or special privileges. They simply asked for cooperation and mutual respect. It was, by any measure, the most successful diplomatic campaign in galactic history. Commander Krael's reconciliation faction grew stronger in the months following the battle. He visited Earth multiple times, studying human culture, human history, human philosophy. He walked through human cities, ate human food, listened to human music. He became something unprecedented in Vorath history, a student of a species that had defeated his own in battle. I met him during one of his visits to Council Central and asked what he had learned from his studies. The first thing I learned, Krael said, is that humans do not think the way we do. We Vorath see the universe as a hierarchy of strength. Every being is either superior or inferior, predator or prey, dominant or submissive. There is no middle ground. There is no cooperation between equals. There is only the endless struggle for dominance. He paused, organizing his thoughts. But humans see the universe differently. They see it as a network of relationships, of mutual dependencies, of shared challenges that can only be solved through cooperation. They do not ask whether another being is stronger or weaker. They ask whether that being can be trusted, whether they share common values, whether they can work together toward a common goal. He gestured around us at the council chamber. This council was founded on Vorath principles. It is a hierarchy, with the strong at the top and the weak at the bottom. The Vorath mandate is the ultimate expression of that philosophy. But the humans have demonstrated that there is another way, a better way. They have shown that a species can be powerful without being oppressive, strong without being cruel, dominant without being destructive. I considered his words carefully. And you believe the Vorath can change? He was silent for a long moment. I do not know. We have been what we are for 40,000 years. Our culture, our biology, our entire way of being is built on the principle of dominance through strength. Changing that will not be easy. It may not even be possible. He looked at me with something that might have been hope. But I have to try. Because the alternative is that we become irrelevant, a fossilized remnant of a philosophy that the universe has outgrown. And I would rather my species die trying to change than live as a monument to our own failure to adapt. These are not the words of a species that cannot change, I observed. Krael almost smiled. No. They are the words of a species that is beginning to learn. The change was not limited to the Vorath. Across the galaxy, species that had accepted the old order as inevitable began to question it. The human victory at Sol had not just defeated a fleet. It had defeated an idea, the idea that might makes right, that the strongest get to decide who lives and who dies. Younger species that had been waiting for an opportunity to rise began to assert themselves. Older species that had grown comfortable with their positions began to worry about becoming obsolete. The entire galactic order, which had seemed as permanent as the stars themselves, suddenly appeared fragile and temporary. I have learned that we were wrong about everything, Krael said simply. We thought strength was physical. We thought dominance was the ultimate goal. We thought the purpose of power was to impose your will on others. The humans have taught me that true strength is something else entirely. It is the ability to protect without dominating. It is the power to help without demanding repayment. It is the willingness to be underestimated because you know that your true capabilities are not measured by weapons you possess but by the choices you make. He looked at me with something that I can only describe as hope. I do not know if my species can change enough to match what the humans have achieved. But I know that we must try. The alternative is irrelevance, and that is a fate worse than defeat. I asked Admiral Alexander Thorne, in what would be our final conversation before his retirement, what he thought the future held for humanity and the galaxy. He was very old by human standards by then. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, his movements slower than when I had first met him. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, still seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. The future is uncertain, Counselor, he said. That is the fundamental nature of the future. But I can tell you what humanity will try to achieve. We will try to build a galaxy where culling is unthinkable. We will try to create a society where power is used responsibly. We will try to prove that cooperation is stronger than domination, that diversity is a strength rather than a weakness, that the universe is big enough for all of us to exist without needing to destroy each other. He paused, and for a moment, he looked out at the stars through his office window. The same stars that his species had gazed at for hundreds of thousands of years, wondering what was out there. And if someone tries to stop us, he continued, we will defend ourselves. We have spent our entire evolutionary history learning how to survive against predators that were physically superior to us. We have spent 200 years preparing for threats from beyond our home world. We have built capabilities that even I, as the commander of our military for 2 decades, do not fully understand. He turned back to me. The Vorath learned this lesson the hard way. I hope no other species has to learn it the same way. But if they do, they will discover that humanity is very, very good at being underestimated. It is, in fact, our greatest talent. He was right. The Vorath Cull failed not because the Vorath were weak, but because they fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their intended prey. They thought they were attacking a primitive species that would fall before their superior technology and military experience. They did not realize they were attacking a species that had been preparing for exactly this moment for 200 years, a species that had built its entire military strategy around the assumption that someone like the Vorath would eventually come. They did not understand that humans had been fighting monsters in the dark for so long that they had learned to become something themselves, something that could match the monsters when necessary but could also choose to be something better. That is the true lesson of the Vorath Cull. It is not a lesson about technology or tactics or military strategy. It is a lesson about the danger of underestimating a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to survive against predators that were stronger, faster, and more dangerous than anything the galaxy had to offer. The Vorath thought they were hunting primitives. They were wrong. And the entire galaxy is still processing the consequences of that mistake. This account has been recorded by chronicler Zorath of the Quarren Confederation, for the permanent archives of the Galactic Council. Let it stand as a warning to all beings who would judge a species by what it shows rather than by what it is. Let it stand as a reminder that the most dangerous being in the galaxy is not the one with the sharpest claws or the strongest fleet or the most advanced weapons. It is the one who has been watching, waiting, and preparing for a very long time, the one who has learned that the greatest victory is the one that never has to be won. The humans have a word for such a being. They call it a predator. And they should know. They evolved among them. The galaxy has changed. It continues to change. The old certainties are gone, replaced by possibilities that no one could have imagined before the Vorath Cull. The Council is reforming itself, slowly and painfully, with humanity pushing from within and the Vorath fracturing from without. New alliances are forming. Old enemies are becoming friends. The entire galactic order is being renegotiated. I have lived long enough to see many changes. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen wars begin and end. I have seen species emerge from their home worlds and take their place among the stars. But I have never seen anything like what is happening now. The humans have done what no other species could. They have broken the cycle of fear and domination that has defined galactic civilization for 40,000 years. They have not done it through conquest or threat or manipulation. They have done it simply by being what they are, a species that refuses to be cowed, that refuses to submit, that refuses to accept that might makes right. They have shown the galaxy that there is another way, a better way, a way built on cooperation rather than domination, on mutual respect rather than fear, on the simple but powerful idea that every species has the right to exist and to determine its own future. Whether the galaxy will embrace that idea remains to be seen. Change is slow, especially for species that have been doing things the same way for tens of thousands of years. But the path has been opened. The possibility has been demonstrated. And that is more than anyone could have hoped for before the Vorath fleet arrived at Sol and discovered that the primitives they had come to cull were something far more dangerous. The Vorath thought they were hunting primitives. They were wrong. And the universe will never be the same. Please like and subscribe to our channel.